Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Since this is National School Choice Week, I invited a couple of very different guests on the program, each trying to solve education problems at opposite ends of the economic spectrum. In the second half of our show, Reshma Singh, Executive Director for the Partnership for Educational Justice, discusses school reform initiatives in New York targeting antiquated teacher tenure and seniority rules. Up first, we have Sugata Mitra, a physicist turned education entrepreneur I spoke with at the Antigua Forum in Guatemala, who's figured out how to build and operate cloud-based, low-cost, teacherless schoolhouses in the remotest parts of rural India. Sugata, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. It's been a wonderful 3 days here at the Antigua Forum. I wanted to chat with you because your theories of minimally invasive education have been quite astounding and controversial. But before we get on to that, I want to ask you a bit about your background. You were trained as a physicist. How in the world did you get off in this direction?
Well, I was trained as a physicist a long time ago, and the reason was because I really liked that subject. But when I finished my PhD, which was in theoretical physics, back in the late 1970s, physicists and mathematicians were the only people who knew how to write computer programs.
Mm-hmm.
I was 26. And when I looked at my options, I saw that I could either go and become a physics teacher somewhere. Mm-hmm. Even if it was a research job, I would still be a teacher. Or I could be a computer programmer. And a computer programmer in those days got paid about 5 times more than a physics teacher did. So it was all about money, really. And I became a computer programmer.
And it pulled you into the very early days of the industry.
Oh, the very, very early days. And because I had a PhD, my boss said, don't be stupid. You can't just go on writing computer programs. You've got to teach other people how to write computer programs. Mm-hmm. So I got into the one thing that I didn't want to get into, teaching and learning.
Which has become your life's work.
I know.
Well, tell us a little about your famous hole-in-the-wall experiment. Now, this was back in the late 90s. It got a lot of attention, and it put you on a path toward what we're going to talk about later, the kind of schools that you're building now. But wind us back and give us the context for the hole-in-the-wall.
Well, I was working with NIIT Limited, which is a really large multinational company, which in those days, its main activity was to teach people to become software developers, train people to become software developers. I was the head of their courseware and the head of their research and development. I had a very plush office in New Delhi. It was a good life.
Good life.
Yeah, very good life. Just outside the office, there's this sprawling slum. And the slum was full of children. So the thought did cross my mind that am I not losing many really good software developers in those kids? I mean, why don't we build a school there? And the answer was because they can't pay.
Right.
So then I thought, isn't there a way that you can learn something without having to pay? And the only thing I could think of was that why don't I just give them a computer?
See what happens.
Yeah, because in my job, as I said, I didn't particularly enjoy teaching. So I used to walk into class and I used to tell those guys, for heaven's sake, why don't you just go ahead and do it? You know, I mean, why do you want to waste my time?
What do you need me for? Hit the keyboard.
So I thought, well, if I can't build a school for those slum kids, then I could at least give them a computer. But how do you give them a computer in a slum? Where do you put it? So the model I had in those days was of the banks, who were the only people who put computers outdoors in those days, and continue to be that way. So I built myself a do-it-yourself ATM.
Like a kiosk.
3 feet off the ground, facing the slum.
3 feet off the ground.
3 feet off the ground. You know, if you put anything 3 feet off the ground, then the first people who come there are usually 3 feet tall.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. So I had this whole bunch of kids who sort of came there. Remember, this is 1999, so they hadn't seen a computer before.
Right.
They had no clue what the internet was. I had, in those days, I had 2 megabit per second internet running on that thing.
Sure.
Which I had pulled out of my office and plugged it in. So they stood around. I stood around. And the kids said, what is it? And in a way, that was I think, the turning point in my life. It sounds like stupid, but I mean, obviously I should say that's a computer.
Right.
But if I said that's a computer, then if this experiment had to be done 1 million times over in the remotest places on the planet, we would need 1 million people capable of saying that's a computer. that was not the case
Can't
at
pay for
that
that,
time.
right.
Yeah, there weren't that many people who could say that. Even today, I think there aren't that many people who can say that. But I realized in an instant that we all have good capability to answer any question by saying, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Almost any human being is capable of doing that, and quite happy to do it, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I don't know. And the kids knew that I wasn't telling them. But what could they do? Because I said, I don't know. So then they said, can we touch it? And I said, well, it's on your side of the wall, so you do what you like with it. And still nothing happened. Nothing at all. They just stood there. I have a photograph from those days.
Just standing, staring at it, like an object from outer space.
Yeah, they're scratching their heads and staring at it. And I stood there with him. I said, now, what do we do next? I can't instruct, remember, because of that whole thing about replicability. And the second turning point in my life happened within those 15 minutes in 1999. And I realized that nothing was happening because I was there, wearing my suit and tie.
Oh.
So I left.
They were intimidated and afraid to play with it.
Yeah, that's what was
So
happening.
you just stuck it out there and left it there.
I just left it there. And about 8 hours later, my other colleagues, this was fairly close to our main gate, so you could see what was going on. They came back in and said, those kids are browsing and they're teaching each other how to browse. So I said, don't be silly. I mean, that's absurd. And they said, no. And I said, but in what language? And they said, well, it's all English. I mean, there's no other language on computers in those days. So I said, well, that's also absurd because they're not supposed to know.
They don't speak English, right?
So what's going on over there? And they said, well, it's very simple. There's no magic in that. One of your students must have been passing by and just showed them how to use the mouse. That's about it. And they're just pointing and clicking and they're not doing anything brilliant. So I said, that's fantastic. So then I should repeat the experiment and I should do it somewhere where the chances of a passing software developer would be zero. So I chose a village far, far away in northeastern India, in the Rai Bareilly district. And put a computer in the wall. By that time, the press had called it the hole in the wall. And the Times of India had a headline story which said that there's this guy who claims that the kids taught themselves.
Self-teaching.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of stupid statement is that? So I repeated the experiment in Rai Bareilly, and it has nothing there. I mean, there's farmers. So there was no place to stay. So I went back after 2 months. And these kids said, you've come back, well, we need a faster processor and a better mouse. So I said, hey, where did you learn all that from? And they complained.
They complained?
Yes, they said, you've given us a machine. They didn't know what it's called. So they said, you've given us a machine that works only in English, so we had to teach ourselves English in order to use it. They didn't sound happy about it at all. My third turning point, I said, what? Taught yourselves English? And they said, yeah, in a distinctly Southern American drawl.
Where did they get that?
From the internet.
Were they watching videos? And
they were downloading all kinds of stuff, and and some of them were talking like Mickey Mouse, and some of them they were doing all sorts of crazy things. But they knew enough smattering of the language to be able to do whatever it is they were doing, and they could download games and install them and things like that. So then I said, well, they've done two things now. They've taught themselves English and they've taught themselves how to use the computer and the internet. So where does it go next?
What else can they learn?
So then I started a whole series of experiments in trying to tease them into learning other things. It's pretty simple to do. You need a computer. You need unsupervised groups of children. And very, very importantly, you need to go away.
Right. To free them.
You don't need adult presence. So that's when I sort of thought of the term minimally invasive.
And you say you have to tease them, and also that groups matter. It's not an individual thing that the children all learn from each other as much as they learn from the computer.
Very, very important points. Those were lessons I learned at that time, that the screen has to be large, publicly visible, in a safe place, and shared by many children. Otherwise, if it's one child, a small screen, nothing will happen.
Yeah, they'll play games and look at porn, and that'll be the end of that.
If that, I mean, if they didn't know how to operate the computer, they wouldn't even be able to teach themselves how to, until some adult showed them, and then they would just, do all the wrong things.
Right.
So every time I meet a parent nowadays, I tell them, big screen, put it in your living room, put broadband on it,
and groups of kids,
and they'll pull you into their world.
So Sugata, up to now, it's a curiosity. How do you actually turn this into something viable and useful?
I wasn't turning anything into anything. Each experiment was raising another question in my mind. So I found out that a group of kids could improve their English pronunciation using a text-to-speech engine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, wow, that's crazy. And then I found a group of kids reading the New Scientist magazine. And I said, hey, they barely know any English. So what sense are they making out of that?
Mm-hmm.
To top all of this was an experiment that I did designed to fail. That experiment was, I think, the turning point in this entire journey towards the future of learning. I had no clue that that's what was going to happen.
Mm.
It happened in a tiny little village which had been hit by the Asian tsunami a few years earlier and just swept clean. I'd given the children a couple of hole-in-the-wall computers because, all the aid and donor agencies were giving them blankets. The temperature in that part of India is usually around 35 degrees centigrade. That's 100 and something Fahrenheit.
Right. What do they need a blanket for?
I don't think you need blankets. But I thought that the children in the middle of that tragedy did need entertainment. So I gave them some nice computers to play with. And they knew those computers. So I designed my experiment around that little village. The village is called Kali Kuppam. And what happened there would one day change education all over the world.
So Sugata, you spent a lot of time experimenting with leaving children alone with computers and made some amazing discoveries about self-learning. And you're now building what you call a school in the cloud. Tell us about that.
Well, let me step back one step back into Kali Kuppam, a village in Pondicherry district in southern India, where the experiment that I designed was designed to fail. The experiment was, can Tamil-speaking 12-year-olds in a South Indian village teach themselves the biotechnology and the biology of DNA replication in English by themselves from a street side computer? And I designed it that way because I wanted to show the world that there is a limit to all of this. It will fail. They won't be able to.
They can't get that far.
You can't. It was undergraduate biology, which I loaded into the computers in Kali Kuppam with the 12-year-old Tamil-speaking children. I gave them a pre-test and they got a 0 in it, obviously. I came back after a couple of months and they said, we've understood nothing. This stuff is just incredibly difficult. I mean, it's chemistry, it's got diagrams. So I said, well, so you gave up, did you? And they said, no, we don't give up. We look at it every day. So I said, what do you mean? You've been for 2 months, you've been looking at this stuff which looks
incomprehensible,
like incomprehensible, right? And you've been looking at it every day. What for? So then this little girl, a 12-year-old girl who I'll remember for the rest of my life, raised her hand and said, in broken Tamil and English, she said, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've actually understood nothing else. So I post-tested them and they got a 30. It's an educational impossibility from 0 to 30 in undergrad material.
Yeah.
But 30 is a fail.
Yep.
So I had to get them another 20. Where will I get the 20 from? Without a teacher. There was a young woman there, an accountant, who used to play with the children. She was, good friends with them. I called this woman and I said, listen, can you teach them a little more biotech? And she said, absolutely not. I mean, I didn't have any science.
Yeah, what do I know? Right.
I don't know anything about it. So I said, look, use the method of the grandmother. She says, what's that? I said, just stand behind them. Whatever it is they're doing, just say, every now and then, just say, wow, how did you get to that page? Where does that go?
Just praise them.
Yeah, and say things like, when I was your age, man, I was absolutely stupid. I could have never done anything like that.
The method of the grandmother.
So she did that for 2 months, and the scores jumped to 50%.
Well, how do you scale grandmothers?
Okay. At this time, something very fortuitous happened. Slumdog Millionaire got released all over the world.
Right. And that was inspired by some of your experiments, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was teaching a course in Newcastle University where I had moved in 2006. 2009 is when Slumdog Millionaire opened in the UK. And they interviewed the guy who wrote the book, which became the film, and he said he was inspired by the Holeinthewall. Until today, I don't quite see the connection, but I mean, it's jolly good that he got inspired. Anyway, as a result, I became a celebrity for a day, as though I had won the Oscar or something like that. The Guardian interviewed me. And during that interview, I requested them, I said, will you put in a couple of lines saying, if you are a British grandmother, if you have broadband and a web camera, will you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free?
So you're recruiting grandmas.
I got 200 in the first 2 weeks.
Wow.
And the British grandmother, let me tell you, is a pretty determined lady. They don't give up easy.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they're not all grandmothers. They're grandmothers and grandfathers and retired teachers and young people and students, or anybody who's interested in children. And I Skyped them in to talk to children.
In the kiosk in the middle of...
nowhere. Where there's no possibility of a good teacher ever reaching. And I tell them, don't teach. Because remember, I learned that teacher intimidates that environment. So I tell them, just talk. Just talk with them.
Just a presence.
Just talk about anything. Talk about your cat. Talk about the weather. The grannies picked that up. And there was a dramatic change in the English of the children.
Mm-hmm. But they have practice now.
Yeah, they have practice. And their mannerisms started to change. The way they spoke started to change and so on. By this time, I'd got funded. So I had lots and lots of holes in the wall all over India. I was measuring the whole thing. And by about 2006, I'd published that here's what's happening. The results were as follows. Groups of unsupervised children left alone with an internet connection, regardless of what language they themselves speak in a period of 9 months will go from 0 in computing literacy to the same level of computer literacy as the average office secretary in the West.
Wow.
It changed the meaning of training all over the world. People said either he's cooked this data up.
Right.
Or there's something dramatically wrong that we were doing with training. The camps fought with each other, but I didn't care. I had more experiments to do. So the granny cloud was by now fully formed by 2010. The hole in the walls were sometimes working, sometimes breaking down. The communities couldn't understand what they were for. All sorts of things like that was happening. In the middle of all this, a school teacher arrived in my room. Her name was Emma. And Emma came in and said, what about England?
What about England?
Yeah, she said, you're doing all this work in India. What about us? What about England? So I said, come on.
What do you need it for? You've
what
got
do you need it for?
schools.
You're a developed country. You've got computers pouring out of your ears all the time. So what do you want me to do? So she said, no, but the hole in the wall. So I said, come on, Emma, you must be crazy. If I do the hole in the wall in this country, in England, all you'll get are frozen children. Because, you can't do anything outdoors.
Right.
So Emma laughed. She said, no, that's not what I mean. I mean the approach. She took me to her school, a school called St. Aidan's in Gateshead, across the river from Newcastle, where I work as a professor at Newcastle University. So I went with Emma and I turned the hole in the wall inside out in her classroom. It's very simple. If you're a teacher or if you're a parent, you can do it very easily. Remove the furniture, put in a couple of computers, let's say 4 or 5.
In a room,
scattered all over the place.
Big screen.
Big screens. Make all the screens face to the door so that if anybody is passing through the door, which is kept open,
they'll see.
You can see what's happening on the screens. Put in a few stools. Let in about 25 children. About 4 children to each computer.
Close the door, go away, or leave the door open.
Leave the door open. And ask them something. When they come in.
Challenge
them. But it's not a challenge. I don't like that word. It's a puzzle. It's a teaser. I call them big questions.
So give an example.
Well, here's an example of a big question. Why does nail and hair grow and have to be cut off? Isn't that kind of stupid?
Yeah.
That's all.
And turn them loose.
Yeah, if they're 9 years old, they'll start making their hypothesis. Oh, it grows because, we need to scratch. And I say, but you don't need a nail which is 4 inches long. If you don't cut it, it'll keep growing. Why does it keep growing? You've got to get their attention. And then you leave them alone in the wide open internet. And you come back a little bit later and you have cell biology, anthropology, evolution.
It's purposeful learning.
Yeah, and it's years and years ahead of its time. because the internet doesn't know their children. So the internet throws everything it has at them.
Mm-hmm.
The children don't know that they're not
supposed to know these things.
They're not supposed to know these things. So they read everything. They read scientific journals. They read the Harvard Business Review. And then they start quoting from all of this stuff. So I realized that this is a new learning situation. This is not structured. It's the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It's chaotic.
And you're not paying a teacher. And I guess that matters when you're going back to undeveloped countries.
Yes. And so initially I gave it a name. Emma and I gave it the name Self-Organized Learning Environments.
Okay.
The word self-organized should not be misunderstood. People often misunderstand it as organizing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I use the word self-organizing in the sense in which physics,
mm-hmm. self-assembling,
a chaotic system from which spontaneous order appears.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I saw that room. And if anybody listening were to set up a similar room somewhere, you will immediately see that what you've got in there is a chaotic situation from which you get emergent order. And I thought, could that be learning? Is that the process of learning?
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know, but I'd like to find out. Brings me back to my old subject, actually.
But you're now building physical structures, and you're dropping them in the most remote places.
Yeah. So then in 2013, I got a prize. I got the TED prize.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't quite expecting it, but it was quite pleasant to get it. And I had to tell TED what I was going to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, look, I've got two things that I've built. One is called a self-organized learning environment, or a SOUL, and the other is the Granny Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
I want to put the two things together and call the combination a school in the cloud. And I want to build 7 of them, ranging from the remotest places in India
Mm-hmm.
to urban middle-class England.
Hmm.
And I want to study them over a 3-year period to see, will the school in the cloud level the playing field? Finally.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the middle of it now. 1.5 years have passed. I've built 7 schools in the cloud. 5 are in India, 2 are in England. They look fantastic, all of them.
You were describing some here in Antigua about schools in the cloud surrounded by Bengal tigers. This fascinated me. Tell us about that one.
I was being a little picturesque, but anyhow, there is an area of Bengal called the Sundarbans, which is where the Ganges meets the sea. It's the biggest river delta in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it is entirely chaotic. The river just goes mad.
Rural, remote. Yeah.
Rural, remote. But that river, the huge Ganges River,
Mm-hmm.
it goes berserk. It breaks up into tens of thousands of little rivulets
Mm-hmm.
and mud swamps and islands.
You can't build roads.
You can't do anything because the land keeps shifting. If you ask someone how much land do you have, there are
Mm-hmm.
sharecropping farmers
Mm-hmm.
there. He says between 1 and 2 acres. So he says, what do you mean between 1 and 2 acres? He says sometimes it's 1 acre, sometimes it's 2.
It depends on the weather.
It depends on the river. He says the river is everything over there. And on some of those islands live the Bengal tigers inside the mangrove forests.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, we try to protect them from getting extinct. On the other hand, they are the only tigers in the world which are born man-eaters. They like the taste of human flesh.
Lovely.
Yes. There are also sundry other creatures like, man-eating crocodiles, poisonous cobras, and that sort of thing.
And how many people live in this river delta?
Millions.
Wow.
They do all sorts of things. Honey gathering is a very common profession, and sharecropping is the other. So I found a place over there which has nothing. Doesn't have healthcare, doesn't have electricity, doesn't have schools. It has nothing.
It has children.
It has children. So I made a school in the cloud there, ground upwards.
Built it. Physical, put a foundation down, drop the room in, put in 4 computers.
Put in 6 computers in there, really good ones.
Had a big tall antenna to find a signal.
I built a tower until I got a mobile signal which would give me 8 Mbps internet.
Mm-hmm.
I put in solar power.
Mm-hmm.
I put in an air conditioner running off solar power.
Ooh, that's a challenge.
I was told it's the only air conditioner within 500 square miles or something like that. But it actually bombed. I want to tell you that. I must tell you this. It's the middle of summer. It's 35 degrees centigrade, 110 Fahrenheit, something like that. Fetid, hot. And my air-conditioned school in the cloud. The AC is humming away, the computers, children
Why
playing.
isn't the whole village in there just to take refuge?
Because I told them they can't enter. If they're grown up, they can't enter. It's only meant for children.
And they follow that rule.
Oh, the children love it. The children won't let them. Because
the children won't let the adults
I told
in.
the children, stop them from coming in. This place
This
is
your
yours.
place.
Yes, your place. Anyway, so there the children, doing all sorts of things. And one little girl comes out of there, I'm sitting outside in this fetid heat.
Mm-hmm.
She comes out there and says, so nice and warm. I said,
chilling them down too much, huh?
I told myself, you stupid oaf, you thought you were doing something great. They don't want that air conditioning.
It's too hot.
It's too much. Their bodies are adapted to that kind of. Anyway, so that's my little story. So it sounds better than it is. It breaks down often.
Mm-hmm.
Computers break down. The internet is intermittent.
Mm-hmm.
Children walk 2 miles through the swamps to come to their school in the cloud and find that it's not up. It's not working.
Mm-hmm.
The granny cloud dials in and repeatedly blogs and says, where is Korakati? They were not online. The village is called Korakati. Where is it? They are not online, etc. It's very disappointing. There are 1,000 problems. And then there is the problem of parent perception. Why have you given them a video game parlor?
Yeah.
Is that what we need here? What are they learning over there?
But can't the parents see they're learning English?
That's about the only saving grace. That's the only reason they don't shut it down. But what they do say is to the children, not more than an hour in there. You must come back and do your homework. You must memorize everything that you've been told. To the few who go to school.
The classic pedagogy.
Yeah. That's the way education has to happen. And what is this man doing? He's taking you away from that. What's going to happen to my child? So it's a very difficult perception problem. I have to solve it. Because if we solve Korakati, we would have solved it anywhere in the world.
Sugata, you've run some fascinating and compelling experiments. How do you make this sustainable?
The interesting thing about the school in the cloud is that it doesn't have a teacher. Or let me put it this way, it doesn't need to have a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You can build them inside schools. They work beautifully well.
Mm-hmm.
And teachers use them.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also build them ground upwards in the middle of nowhere. And they run without teachers. If you take the teacher out of the equation in the school in the cloud, your costs drop dramatically, particularly if you've made the initial investment in solar power.
So what's the per pupil cost of running one of these things?
Between $1 and $2 a month.
A month?
A month. So I have a very straightforward job right now. I have to go to my remotest place. I have to keep it running for at least another 2 years and use those 2 years to figure out how to convince the parents that $2 a month
is worth it. And at that point, you hit scalability.
At that point, you could have a billion of them. You're no longer stuck with this thing about where am I going to get those teachers from.
And the initial capital cost you can raise.
Yeah, I think the initial capital cost should come from you, me, from all of us.
Right.
If we don't want trouble.
Sugata, thanks so much for being on the show.
All right, thank you for having me.
That was Sugata Mitra, Professor of Educational Technology at Newcastle University, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. To send us comments and feedback on this or any of our past shows, visit realclearradio.org and click on the Email Bill link. Real Clear Radio Hour is a partnership with Real Clear Politics, which the New York Times has called an invaluable tool for anyone interested in politics or public affairs. Ahead, Reshma Singh from the Partnership for Educational Justice weighs in on advocacy programs designed to level the educational playing field right here at home. Stay tuned.